Hello, I'm Hugh Coakley from the Guildford Dragon News. We have the great pleasure today to be talking to the Guildford-based international musician and pianist and composer, Will Todd. Welcome, Will, and thanks for talking to the Guildford Dragon News.
Thanks, Hugh. It's lovely to be here and chat to you.
Okay, Will, you're a jazz pianist, you're a composer of operas, choral music, symphonies, and you're a conductor. You seem to cover a huge range of music. You merge jazz and the classical. Your work is harmonious and exciting. It is absolutely wonderful. You composed a choral piece for the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, performed in St. Paul's Cathedral in front of the Queen. Your Mass in Blue is performed all around the world. I mean, it's a hugely successful piece. You are arguably Guildford's most renowned and famous composer of today. What's your reaction to that? And tell us about your music.
Well, of course, it's delightful to be talked about in such glowing terms, Hugh. Every artist loves that, of course, and I'm really thrilled with how my career has gone, because, of course, like every musician, you start off at a point of wanting to succeed or wanting to get your ideas out there. I began at the piano, as you were saying, and I actually sort of taught myself the piano in the first instance, kind of by experimentation as a small child, and then I had piano lessons later. And I think because I kind of experimented on the piano as a youngster, that's probably why the jazz side comes very naturally to me, because performing without music is just as easy, in some ways for me, easier than performing with music in front of me, and it comes very naturally. But you start with a dream and you don't really know how you're going to get there, and so to be at this point with works, you mentioned Mass in Blue, that's been a really wonderful piece for me to have been associated with. The piece I wrote for the Diamond Jubilee for the Queen, again, was a really wonderful boost to my career to do that. You have to acknowledge, particularly in the arts, you get little bits of good fortune along the way. You hope that you're good enough to sort of convert good fortune into good things. But perhaps we'll talk about that a little bit as we go along.
And you had you composed the opera for the Welsh National Opera, the
Migrations. Yes,
Migration.
Migration.
Sorry, Migration, and that received rave reviews. It was
Yeah,
loved.
that it was, and that was a really, I mean, so my association with theatre music goes way back into my childhood, and there are two strands that stick out. One is that my mum and dad loved listening to operas on records. Remember records, everyone? Disc. And they used to get them out of the public library and listen to pieces by Verdi or Puccini, and so these were sort of on in the background. And I also had a massive love of musicals, particularly Andrew Lloyd Webber. My first sort of thing I listened to was Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and I loved that. And then it sort of progressed on to Jesus Christ Superstar. And I think from that point, from listening to theatrical music, opera and musicals, I had this kind of love of the idea of musicalizing a story. And so throughout my career, I've and you'll be delighted to know I started trying to write my first opera when I was about 10. I think it got to about the second bar before I was exhausted and gave up. And I thought, oh, this is really hard work. But I always had that sort of dream in my mind. And when I was a student at Bristol University, I had some great friends who were also interested in writing theatre things. So we wrote a few little sort of musical theatre pieces. Because the thing about opera or musical theatre is it's very complicated to put together. There's a lot of bits to an opera. There's the songs, there's the bits that go in between the songs, and then there's the whole aspect of it being a production with lights and costumes and scenery and all this kind of thing. Very collaborative art form, actually. Um, and so I think when I got that commission from Welsh National Opera well, it was before COVID, in fact, so it was 2017, it was delayed with the pandemic. It sort of, I'd done enough other opera projects that I felt I could really flow into that one with a lot of confidence. But it was a great project to be a part of.
And you had great feedback from the librettist. They loved working with you.
Yeah, and actually, one of the sort of potential challenges of that project was that the piece was about migrations, as the story suggests, and we had different British writers covering different stories related, not exclusively, but related to their own backgrounds. So Miles and Edson, for example, a writing duo from Bristol, have a Caribbean heritage, and their story was about a slave story, essentially. And the challenge was weaving all these stories together. There were 6 different stories, so it could have ended up being 18 hours long, and B, you wanted to make sure that every story got the right sort of energy. So what I actually ended up saying to all those writers was, write me exactly what you want to say, and then I'll try and tell you how we could sort of cut it down and get the music to help us tell the story as succinctly as possible. So it was challenging, but I loved working with all of them. They were great.
So you were the driving force behind that, it seemed to me. You were
Well,
the one
I
who
was
pulled it all together.
Yeah, I was certainly the connective force,
Okay.
because I think something with that many moving parts, something had to be solid. So I think having one musician covering all the music
Yeah.
gave it that sort of bedrock, really.
Your piece, The Call of Wisdom, which you composed, and it was sung in front of the Queen at a Diamond Jubilee. What a huge accolade! Is that a highlight of your career?
It's definitely a highlight of my career. It was a wonderful event to be a part of. I don't know if you know, but the children's choir who sang it in front of the Queen was actually a specially assembled choir from all over the country. And the idea was to try and be as representative of the whole country as possible at that event. So they made sure they had some choristers from Newcastle and Scotland, and a kid from a primary school in Northern Ireland, and all this kind of thing. So the choir was a wonderful achievement in itself. But to be there as a part of that event was just incredible. I'll tell you a little story though about kind of how I got the job, and I think it's quite a good story in lots of ways, because I was doing a piece of work at St Edmundsbury Cathedral in Suffolk, and it was a youth project. I was asked to write a little piece of choral music for a youth choir in the cathedral, and I wrote this piece, and I enjoyed writing it. And I remember the first performance was not exactly celebrity time, because we did it on a Tuesday evening at Evensong, and there were 2 mums in the audience and me. Right, so it wasn't the big time, okay, but it was a good piece, and they still sing it actually at St Edmundsbury, which I'm very proud of. Well, what happened was that the guy who'd commissioned me moved jobs, and he went to St Paul's Cathedral, and in his very first meeting, they were saying, well, we think we should have a sort of youth choir piece as a centerpiece for the Queen's celebration. And he said, you should use Will Todd, because he writes lovely music for these youth singers.
Well,
And I often talk about that to students. If I'm saying that if you ever want an example of why you should always do your best work, always, 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 it's that. Because I wouldn't have done this, but you might have thought, well, it's just something happening in a little cathedral way out in nowhere. No one was there. But I tried to do the best piece possible, and look how it paid off for me.
how did your family react when you found out? How did you react when you found out?
Well, what, that I got the commission? It was,
Yeah.
yeah, it was quite wonderful. I actually had the conversation with the director of music in this very room. This is my little studio at the end of the
Yeah.
garden, and I sort of, as soon as I put the phone down, I sprinted into the house and sort of started telling everyone. And then I thought, oh, I've got to be a bit careful because, you know, we have nothing sort of on the dotted line yet. It's just a phone conversation. You have to be a bit careful of getting ahead of yourself. No, but everyone was very, very, very happy.
All right. What's your life like as a musician? It's not just sitting in front of a piano and putting notes on a paper. You're based here in Guildford. You travel a lot, I think. Give us a flavour of a typical week in the life of Will Todd, composer.
Sure. Yes. Well, of course, no week is the same, as you've sort of suggested. Sometimes I'm more composing based, in which case I'll be spending my days sat here playing my lovely Yamaha piano that I love to do.
So that's a Yamaha electric.
It's not actually, well, it's both actually. It's an acoustic piano, but it's got electric sensors, so it can also talk to the computer. It's very, very lovely instrument.
Okay.
So if I'm composing, I'll work here and I'll be writing things down on paper and then using the computer. But you know, every week at some point there'll be an event like a rehearsal or a recording or a concert that I'll be a part of. So then that means ironing my shirt. Hugh, always iron my own shirt for a gig. We were in the Cadogan.
Who else would iron it?
Well, exactly. Who else would iron it?
Just
I grew up in the right sort of household, I believe, where the idea was if you wanted something ironing, there's the iron. You know what I mean? We were at the Cadogan Hall yesterday doing Mass in Blue, in fact. And
wow.
So that would mean getting stuff in the car, probably putting CDs and shop stock in the car, getting over to Cadogan, setting up with the music, doing a rehearsal, eating some food and then performing, you know, and then doing the get out and getting home. You know, sometimes that's quite late, of course, if you're far away from home, you've got a long journey home. I do a lot of international trips, or have done. COVID's changed things a little bit, and again, that would mean going away to a choir, perhaps in America, being hosted by them. And then, you know, I mean, I must say, I do love weeks when I am basically just in Guildford and I can do things here. And, you know, I love Guildford. I love the community. We've been here for nearly 20 years. So it's a really nice place to live. Feel very blessed to live here.
Yeah.
So when I can kind of be at home, it's the best, I think.
So Guildford's a cultured place, I think. What are your links with music in Guildford? How do you make your music local, if you do?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting one. So we lived in London, and then after our kids were born, like a lot of people, we started thinking, oh, maybe we could think about moving outside London, and we came to Guildford. And
why Guildford?
Well, at that time, my wife Beth was working at English National Opera, and so she was doing shows there, singing in the chorus there. So we needed to be somewhere where she could get back, you know, wouldn't be late getting back from a show in London. So it was kind of geography that made that choice.
Okay.
Also, for me personally, you know, I grew up in Durham City in the northeast of England, and although, you know, they're very different in lots of ways, you know, Guildford is that kind of vibe. It's got a cathedral, it's got a university, you know, it's historic. It's got those. So for me, there is a sort of familiarity about Guildford somehow, which I really like. But when I first moved here, you know, we didn't really know many people. And initially, the first sort of piece of work I did locally was at the university here. And a friend of mine called Steve Goss, who lives in Guildford and is actually also a wonderful international composer. It would be wrong of me not to mention the wonderful Steve Goss, who teaches at the university and composes all sorts of wonderful music. Got me in as a part-time teacher at the university teaching the jazz elements. So that was really great. That kind of got me, you know, it was part-time work, but it got me sort of grounded in the scene of music here, which was great. And of course, there's the International Music Festival that the university do. So I sort of began to get into the culture that way. I also joined Holy Trinity Choir when I arrived here, just as, you know, as a singer, which again connected me to a whole bunch of great people, Holy Trinity, and you know, in the cathedral. So those sort of links. So quite quickly, I sort of found like-minded people here, which was great.
Nice one. We were talking to you. I was talking to you a couple of weeks ago, and you mentioned the difficulty of making a living, particularly with the onset of internet streaming. Tell us about that. What's the answer? If there's an
Well,
answer.
well, first of all, I think just to try and give you the economics of it, nearly everyone, and for very understandable reasons, listens to music streamed, or a very high proportion of people. So, you know, and there's a lot of advantages of that, because if you suddenly think, oh, I want to listen to that lovely slow movement from Beethoven's Fourth Symphony, you just find that on Spotify and there it is, and you listen to it a couple of times, right? Now, what that means is that even albums that you love, you might not buy outright, because effectively for your £10.99 or £13 a month, you've got endless access to that album whenever you want, right? Now, streaming, the way artists earn off streaming is per play, but it's very small numbers. You're talking points of a penny off a play, okay? Now, that's fine if you've got many millions of plays, because that will add up to, you know, blocks of money. But if you think about a sort of niche artist like myself, or a singer-songwriter who might have quite a big following, what they'd really like is someone to commit £7.99 to the album, and then they'll get £7.99, because, to be honest, the amount of play you need to get £7.99 is absolutely huge.
I mean,
And it's probably,
what are you talking about? Are you talking about a
well,
couple of hundred?
you're talking about many thousands of listens to
So
get you up to that.
thousands of listens just to the equivalent of a CD sale.
Yes, absolutely, because, you know, those points of a penny have got to add up. So, you know, you're actually talking about listening to an album more times than anyone would ever listen to an album.
So it's set up so that the streaming companies get their money, get their £7.99 a month, and it's set up so the Adeles and the famous singers and songwriters and so on get their money.
Yeah.
And where does it leave? Where does it leave the vast majority of musicians? Is it the same position as you've always been in, the poor musician?
Well, I think it's different from the 70s, for example, because in the 1970s you could make a disc of, say, My Mass in Blue, and, you know, you actually could make a profit off selling the records. You know, you press 1,000 records, you sell them, and you've actually paid for the recording and you're in profit, you see. So that is gone. So the danger of it is it means making music is a real loss leader. And that's true right at the top of the industry. I mean, Adele, they're spending £250,000 making an album. They're not really expecting necessarily to get all of that back off streaming. What that's about is it underpins the live tour.
Okay.
And the live tours are where you make your big money. So I think it's that old thing, isn't it? About a sort of economies of scale. It works right at the top where the scale is massive. At the lower end, you're basically looking at it as it being a sort of loss leader. And, you know, you want to get your music out there, so perhaps you're prepared to invest your own money in a recording. And it's just tough, I think, because I think we've sort of sleptwalked into it a little bit. Because on the face of it, streaming looks great because it means it's easy to access music. But the trickle down is that you could quite quickly, in a few years' time, get to a point where only people with sort of private means can make a disc. Or I'm using the word disc in inverted commas because there aren't any discs.
Yeah, so
you know.
you are a gentleman of a certain age.
I'm a gentleman of a certain age, so, you know, I feel for a singer-songwriter now. You know,
how does a young musician make money nowadays? How do they make it their living?
It's very tough. I mean, they've got to try and get a live following. Live gigs is what you need to, you know, because you've got paying customers coming through a door at that point, and the competition is very high for that. You know, we know down at Zero Carbon Guildford, where we do an open mic night, you know, we get loads of people in, you know, great singers come and sing, and, you know, they're people trying to make their way and get in front of an audience. But I mean, that's they're doing that for free because they're trying to make their way. In one sense, something hasn't changed, which is that in the arts, you do have to be single-minded and push forward and be prepared not to make a lot of money. I mean, that's just a fact. If you go into the arts on the basis of making a lot of money, the numbers for who that will be true are vanishingly small. Most artists, people in the arts, are highly dedicated people who've made a sort of commitment to their career, do great work, hopefully make a living, but it won't be sort of the big time.
You just released a new piano album, Playing Free. Could you tell us about it?
Yeah, now Playing Free is an album recorded in this room on this piano. And going back to something I said earlier about my route into music, which was by improvising and experimenting, my whole life I've started my musical day by just sitting down and playing the piano. Just and I don't think about it beforehand. I just start. Right.
How long do you improvise for?
It could be anything. I mean, normally it's probably about 5 to 8 minutes, but you know, I could go on for longer than that. So I just begin a piece. I'll start one now, right? So without thought, here we go. Okay, so that's a piece. As I turned, Hugh, to play that, I had no free thought about the speed, the style, the notes, or anything.
It didn't come across very well, actually. I'm not sure I heard it very well.
Well, it was great. Just so you know, it was really lovely.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah, no, I've noticed this on Zoom. It gets a bit muffled, doesn't it? Anyway, the point about the Playing Free album is that I wanted to capture that improvised music. So what I did was I literally every morning I just set up the microphones, set up the recording to go, and I just played. You see. So there's 14 tracks on there, and every one of them is a completely unedited, one take improvisation with no planning beforehand.
Other than time, presumably you had a time limit.
No.
Okay.
So some of that, I think the shortest one on there is about 2 minutes, and there's a couple that are over 5 minutes.
Okay.
There was no time span. And the other rule I had on it was, if I played a sort of piece and got to the end and thought, oh, I made a few mistakes in there, I wasn't allowed to go back and try it again.
Okay.
So the whole point is that it's very much capturing that improvisation.
Yeah.
And I really didn't know whether it was going to work, whether the tracks would be, you know, good enough to put out there. So in the end, when I had about 25 of these tracks, I picked what I felt was sort of the best 14.
Yeah.
And they're the album. And you know, two things about that. I love listening to it myself, which is amazing because I'm normally highly critical of my own music, but I actually enjoy listening to this. And the feedback from people has been absolutely wonderful. They're saying it's a very sort of chilled out album. It's just nice to listen to. So, you know, I don't know whether I'll do another one of those, but it was certainly a lovely thing to do, and very different from some of the big orchestrated pieces I'm doing, like Migrations you mentioned, where it's a huge score with thousands of notes that I've written out and everyone's being very precise and we've rehearsed it lots and lots of times. This is like the opposite. It's like, here's a piano, here's a pianist, go. So, you know, if you listen, yeah.
It strikes me that you do like to have fun with your music.
I do, Hugh. I really do. There's the reason why it's called. I couldn't quite. You know, I was thinking about what the title would be of that album, but I knew the word playing or playfulness had to be in it, because to me, when I'm playing the piano like that, it is like playing, a bit like being a big kid again, or a little kid, and just doing it for fun.
That's
music
fantastic.
needs to be fun.
So Will, Guildford's most renowned, most famous composer, what is on the horizon for Will Todd?
Yeah, okay. So Will Todd's doing well. We just had the 20th anniversary concert of Mass in Blue yesterday in Cadogan Hall, which was really exciting. Had a great audience there, and the choir who originally commissioned that piece, Hertfordshire Chorus, were the choir for that. So I'm doing a lot of Mass in Blues around the country over the next sort of 12 months. I've got a trip to the US at the start of next year. I'm trying, when I travel now for obvious, environmental reasons, I'm trying to make sure if I make a big trip, I do as much as possible on one trip rather than doing a whole bunch of trips. So I'm hoping that next year I can put together a whole lot of US stuff in the March period. So we're preparing for that. I've got a lot of music to write. I'm writing a piece for Liverpool Cathedral at the moment, the Anglican Cathedral up there. I've got a piece I'm writing for the 16, the Chamber Choir, the 16, which will be happening in a couple of years' time, working with a writer called Sally Gardner, who's an author, brilliant writer, doing a new piece. Concerts, ironing, obviously, as I mentioned, doing my ironing, very important part of my life here in Guildford.
Well, maybe you should be like President Zelensky. He never wears a shirt, or it's
no,
t-shirts.
exactly.
He goes
Yeah,
into the most exalted company in
yes.
in his combats.
Maybe someone should buy him an iron.
Maybe that's what's needed. Okay, and on that international note, Will, thank you very much for talking to the Guildford Dragon News. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you, Hugh.